That was always the scariest sound, because it's like, whether it was coming from behind you, whether it was, you knew it's like, okay, that's about to happen to me fairly soon.
Shane Koyczan has clear memories of being bullied in childhood, and he's turned them into acclaimed poetry. But the physical assaults and the mental anguish that mark so much of his early life are never far from the surface. And as an adult, his attempts to explore and understand what happened have taken him on a creative journey, including an opera making its debut in Vancouver. Here's Duncan McHugh with more on the boy who made words his weapon.
It's definitely not the opera aficionados expect. It's called Stick Boy, based on a long poem about a teen who turns from bullied into bully. For the man who penned the libretto, Canada's best-known spoken word poet, this rehearsal is difficult to watch. It's Shane Koyczan's childhood nightmare, laid bare for all to see, and he's afraid.
I'm opening myself up here. Am I going to be eviscerated? I'm giving you the most personal. I'm giving you the keys to destroy me with. What are you going to do with it? It's terrifying.
His tormented childhood wasn't evident at the 2010 Winter Olympics when the world first met a mostly unknown slam poet from Penticton.
We have millions upon millions of voices shouting, "Keep exploring!"
After his stirring performance, success snowballed.
There's so many of you.
Things really took off after this TED Talk.
When I was 10, I was told that my parents left because they didn't want me. When I was 11, I wanted to be left alone. When I was 12, I wanted to die. When I was 13, I wanted to kill a kid.
His poem, called To This Day, tackled bullying with naked honesty.
As if broken bones hurt more than the names we got called, and we got called them all. So we grew up believing no one would ever fall in love with us, that we'd be lonely forever, that we'd never meet someone to make us feel like the sun was something they built for us in their tool shed. So broken heartstrings bled the blues as we tried to empty ourselves so we would feel nothing. Don't tell me that hurts less than a broken bone.
The video racked up millions of hits on YouTube, to the astonishment of the poet, who wasn't sure he wanted to relive his childhood.
I talk about my grandmother saving books that I'd written as a kid. And for the longest time, I didn't want to look through any of it because I thought, oh, this is going to be dark and awful, and just why would I want to remember any of that? And I looked at my life as this sort of rock, this lifeless rock that sort of was there. That was my childhood.
And this is the town, the high school, where much of his suffering took place.
Being in a place like this now, it's always a trigger, right? You know, these are places I don't want to go to. That's a sound you'd hear a lot in school, and that was always the scariest sound, because it's like, whether it was coming from behind you, whether it was, you knew it's like, okay, that's about to happen to me fairly soon.
To young Shane, school was a battleground, the hallways, no man's land.
When I was in school, my locker kept getting graffitied with all kinds of, just fat ass, things like that. And it got to the point where I just didn't want to use a locker ever again.
Even worse, gym class.
Whatever sport it was, whether it was like floor hockey and all of a sudden you're getting cross-checked too much, or it was dodgeball and everybody's throwing their ball at you, basketball, just elbows in the face, things like that. And then not to mention the dressing room.
Stick Boy describes aggression more vicious: black eyes, bloodied noses, cracked ribs, skin scalded by boiling water.
There were a lot of big violent moments, and people always ask about those. Those are the ones that must have set you off. No, the little ones, the name calling, just the little things that happened along the way that all just sort of added up into something much bigger. Like physical violence was something I could deal with. You know, the emotional side of it, the psychological side of it was much different.
Shane Koyczan.
Oh my God.
The obvious question, how did he survive those years? He credits the woman who raised him, one of the few he could trust.
It wasn't like I got home every night and you know, my grandmother would just be like, so what happened today? And I would just spill everything out there. That was the person who felt it with me more than anybody else. Like there wasn't anybody else. There wasn't anybody else who knew the way she knew. You know, there wasn't anybody else there to clean it all up and to, you know, like, I mean, to wipe away the bloody noses or to bandage up the cuts or to stitch the this or that or to do the harder work of taking your spirit and making it clean again and just saying, you can do this, you have to do this. You have to be strong. You got, like, yeah, she comes up a lot in my life.
There was also this place, an oasis.
For me, it was such a place of sort of escape, not just from, you know, the cruelty of school outside, but escape imagination-wise as well. All of a sudden, you didn't have to think about everything else that was out there. You got to think about James and living on a giant peach with a bunch of insects. And I always wanted to create that. I always wanted to build that for other people. And I thought, you know, like, I mean, instead of me entertaining you by being the brunt of your jokes or violence, why can't I entertain you this way?
That opportunity came about by fluke when the school registered him in drama instead of drafting.
And it was that, you know, that first experience of getting up in front of other people and sharing a poem and somebody, just one person coming up to me afterwards and being like, me too. I knew other kids were going through exactly what I was going through, but we didn't speak to one another. We didn't say that to one another. And so the moment I got up and said something, that gave somebody permission to say it too. And that to me was where, you know, the idea of my voice is a weapon, my thoughts are ammunition. That's where all of that came from. And to me, then on, it was just a driving force. And it's like, it's ever since then, it's been like, how far can I take this?
Now, his voice is a weapon, and he's in demand.
And David, have you met Don McKellar?
Hi. Oh, hi. Sort of.
Rubbing shoulders with celebrities and asked to pitch in with a poem on David Suzuki's Cross Canada farewell tour. Unable to quietly practice.
I remember how my grandmother tried to explain our world to me. She told me a story. She said, the ground and the sky, they love each other.
Without fans propositioning him.
I'm wondering if you would have lunch with me tomorrow. It's a little bit bold, but...
No, boldness is appreciated. I appreciate that. Awesome. Thank you.
See you later.
All right, take care.
After gracefully declining, he wows the crowd with a plea to protect the planet.
When we learn that this tiny blue marble we call the world has rules. Rule number 1, don't fuck with the bees.
He's an unusual commodity, a poet who actually makes a living off his work.
It's about a childhood crush, and it's it's about well, not girlfriend, because we never did anything.
A poet whose recurring themes remain depression and bullying.
Because when a 10-year-old girl can go on to shock 3 bullies into silence, you know you have just determined your lifelong definition of beautiful.
A poet who crisscrosses the continent. Now, tackling the biggest project of his career, an opera, the most tumultuous period of his life, entrusted to the large team at Vancouver Opera.
I recognize the fact that this is not my genre. I've never worked, so I really appreciated the help. As much as I was like, oh, you're butchering my life.
Explaining to patrons the creative process behind a work as experimental as Stick Boy takes a whole panel of artists.
For me, it was just sort of like,
letting go and trusting the process and being like, as long as the core of the story is still here, as long as it's still my story, then I'm okay with that.
He's anxious to see this story of bullying, his story, writ large, hopes it will speak to young audiences. The opera will, no doubt, make people cry. A gritty look at how mean kids can be. And Stick Boy has no happy ending.
I really love what everyone's done. I think it's an incredible piece of work, but it's difficult for me to sit through it, to just sort of realize that that isn't somebody else's life, that's my life.
Still, hard not to see Shane Koyczan as a symbol of hope.
We grew up learning to cheer on the underdog because we see ourselves in them. We stem from a root planted in the belief that we are not what we were called.
The boy who made words his weapon, thoughts his ammunition.
But our lives will only ever always continue to be a balancing act that has less to do with pain and more to do with beauty.
Duncan McHugh, CBC News, Vancouver.